Chris Alvarez, and welcome to Military History Inside Out, brought to you by War Scholar. We talk about military history from ancient to modern times and everything in between. You can find more podcast episodes, written interviews, word games, and the most detailed military history timeline on the web at warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. We're on YouTube at warscholar1945. You can send comments and suggestions to info@warscholar.org. Thanks for listening. I'm speaking with Dr. David Blome, author of Greek Warfare Beyond the Polis, Defense Strategy in the Making of Ancient Federal States, published by Cornell University Press, coming out April 15th, 2020 is what I have. Thank you for speaking with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first, how did you get into studying and writing on this subject of ancient Greek warfare?
Well, for me, it started in the Marine Corps. That was my first real job. I left high school early to enlist in the Marine Corps, and that was in 1998, and then into 99. And over the years, I just did a lot of reading, and I got onto the ancient Greeks originally by a copy of the Iliad when I was deployed in Iraq in 2004. And if anyone remembers this is when the movie Troy came out. And before we went over there, we went just to see the movie. There's nothing else to do, and I didn't really think it was that impressive. But somebody bought a copy of the book, and I read it in Iraq and was just really intrigued because I recognized so much of it was so familiar to anyone that's spent any amount of time in a military or has been deployed. There's a lot there, and I wanted to learn more about it. And I knew I was getting out of the Marine Corps. I knew I was going to go to college, and I said, well, I'll just take a couple classes and see if there's anything to this. But that really was the beginning. I went to the University of Pennsylvania as an undergraduate, and I started off thinking that I was going to pursue a medical career, and very quickly got away from that because really the only thing I wanted to learn about was primarily ancient Greek and the ancient Greeks, and the more I learned, the more fascinating I became. And after finishing a senior thesis with my undergraduate advisor, I just wanted to keep doing it. So I applied to a PhD program and got accepted and saw it all the way through. And bit of a long story, but yeah, that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So, all right. So is this your first book on the subject?
Yeah, this is my first book on the subject. It is.
Okay. So how is the book broken down? Does it go chronologically, or do you approach it by themes?
Well, it does. It focuses on the classical period, which is roughly from the time of the Persian Wars, so Thermopylae, Marathon, Thermopylae, roughly from that time frame to about the middle of the 4th century BCE. Mm-hmm. So just a couple of decades before the rise of Alexander the Great, or the Macedonians. Mm-hmm. And so that's its chronological focus. And within the book, there's 4 cases that span that time frame. So the first case starts around 490. Don't have an exact date on that particular instant. This is the topic of chapter 1, but it's around 490. And the last one is around 370. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. And I notice in the book description, it mentions the strategies of the upland Greeks and sort of a tension with other, I guess, the states in the lower areas and the flatter areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is the focus. Which wasn't my intent going into the project, but yeah, the polis or polis, however you choose to pronounce it, is generally associated with the lowland regions of the classical Greek world. So places like, of course, Athens is probably the most famous, and Sparta and Thebes. So city-states is just another word for polis. Mm-hmm. And you don't see too many of them in the more mountainous regions. They're there, but it's not really the main event. It's not really the central organizing polity. It's not really a city-state. It was a different form of state, which is called an ethnos in ancient Greek, and it gives us words like ethnicity and ethnic, and it translates roughly to nation or people or sometimes tribe. And so all of the Greeks that I study in the book are all from those mountainous regions and during the classical period, where they're, just to judge from the written sources, there just doesn't seem like there was that much going on. And so I really dug into those 4 cases, and I'm offering a different perspective on that.
Yeah, I see that it says that perhaps military history hasn't been properly taken into account in Greek scholarship. So if you could expand on that idea.
Well, it's certainly been, it's a really important focus of ancient Greek scholarship, but it's never really looked at these mountainous regions that seriously. And I don't think it's because it's not that anyone, has some sort of deficiency or they miss something. There's just not that much material that's there, not that much evidence. But there's some. And when I started the project, I was looking for unconventional military encounters, unconventional operations, anything that was just out of the ordinary, because there's just so much work, so much good work too on conventional Greek warfare during the classical period. And I was like, well, what about some of the stuff that's a bit unusual? And so I went through, from reading the primary sources, I could point to different incidents, but I wasn't sure how they were related or if they were related. That took some time. But as I was doing this, as I focused on, really the 4 cases that end up being the subject of the book, I was just very surprised. I said, well, nobody's really talked about these, or they're brought up and then kind of dismissed, or sometimes they're interesting for linguistic reasons, like there'd be debates in commentaries about, say, Thucydides' use of a certain word, but nothing that really focused on the actual battles, the military encounters themselves. And that's where I got started.
So when you say unusual, give me some examples of what was unusual that you came across in these conflicts or battles. Well, probably the easiest way to find it, what was usual, most of us agree, would be a conventional encounter, or really the sorts of things that most people are familiar with, that they know anything about Greek warfare, they're interested in Greek warfare. And the ordinary or the conventional encounter would be 2 phalanxes lined up with shields and spears, and a clash in an open field, a decisive victory, and that'd be the end of it. Now that's just a rough outline. There wasn't really, in the cases that I'm studying, there was awareness of many of the different conventions of Greek warfare. So the rules that often were broken, but were still there nevertheless. There's an awareness of it, and there's almost a deliberate manipulation of them. So it's understood that Greeks would behave a certain way on a military campaign, and it's that understanding that the upland Greeks that I study actually exploited. You mean exploited certain manners of behavior that the lowland Greeks followed?
Right. Right. So it's looking for a more open fight on a large field. If we show up and we line up, we're expecting you to come out and fight. If you don't do that, it must be because you're afraid or something's wrong. Well, okay. Well, if we know that you're going to do that, and we know that there's only a couple of places that all of you invaders can fit, well, we can position ourselves around that area, wait for you to move into a space where you'd be comfortable, and then that's when we're going to surprise you. And that's the basic pattern, is almost a luring of these big, heavily armed lowland armies into terrain that suits the defenders, the upland Greeks. And once they get them there, sometimes they attack, sometimes they don't. But once they're there, that's when you see the actual combat that study in the book.
Yeah, that example makes me think of the 300, of course, where they sort of funnel the enemy into a narrow pass, more or less. What other, I'm curious, you mentioned these rules that were sometimes broken, I guess even by lowland Greeks during warfare. Do you have any examples of those that you could mention?
A big one is activities at night. So most of the time, normal circumstances, conventions of ancient warfare, most activity was done during the day. And although it's not always stated with the upland Greeks that I'm studying, it's clear that the attacks that they execute, there's simply no way that they could have happened without significant activity during the night. And sometimes even the very first case that I studied, the attack happens at night, and very unusual. And also unusual that in that case, and we're talking about the Phocians, this is the topic of chapter 1, the attackers, they chalk themselves up so they can see each other for different reasons, and they attack at night, which is there's just almost nothing like it in the rest of classical Greek history, but they did it.
I'm speaking with David Blome, author of Greek Warfare Beyond the Polis. You can get more information by searching for him on academia.edu. If you like this podcast, please rate it on whatever podcast feed you're listening to it on. Please also follow, like, and comment on my website, warscholar.org, at YouTube under Warscholar 1945, on Twitter and Facebook at Warscholar, and on Instagram at Chris Alvarez Warscholar. If you like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, please check out my podcast, Full Contact Nerd, also located at chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. If you like outer space, business, technology, and policy, please check out my podcast, Spacewalks Money Talks, also at spacewalksmoneytalks.com. Now back to the podcast. When you mentioned night, the first thing that popped into my mind was the story of Odysseus going into the enemy camp and basically killing people while they were sleeping, which in one hand seems dishonorable, but on the other hand, he was praised for his canniness to surprise the enemy and dispatch a few of them. Yep. With Diomedes, that's right. He took a partner, and this is a good tension just in ancient Greek warfare in general. But there is this: we value the courage, value the manliness, value the ones that want to stand up and fight in the open. But then there's also value placed on that cunningness. That's right. Just like Odysseus. It's valued maybe not just as much, but as well. So that is a tension. So it makes me wonder if so you do have these two different kinds of heroes, the upfront honorable fighter versus the canny efficient fighter. Would that tension have existed because you had two different sort of societies in Greece and each one was promoting their own values, or how do you think that came about, that sort of dichotomy? No, that's good. Yeah, the basic breakdown of upland, lowland, ethnos, polis. The Greeks did think that way. They were binary a lot of times in their thinking. So, for instance, free, slave, Greek, non-Greek, that sort of thing. But you're really talking about differences in a way of life. And as an ancient Greek, if you lived in a lowland, primarily in a place that really relied on agriculture, for instance, that had access to quality fields and
had a developed political system that was based in a city-state, a polis. Your way of life was different compared to Greeks that didn't have as much access to good land for agriculture, that relied more on animals for sustenance, that didn't really have that much architecture, didn't really have that many built-up spaces, and they weren't really organized along the lines of a city-state. So a little bit just more loose and clear relationship with each other as an ethnos, shared language, shared customs, but not really as intense in the political sphere. So I think and argue the differences have a lot to do with the way of life that you encountered in the mountains or in the lowlands of the classical Greek world. And then with that, so you have a way of war that's informed by that and shaped by it. So very much in communication with each other. It's not like the Greeks up in the mountains just didn't know what was going on down there. Of course they did. But their practices were rooted more in that mountain way of life. That's the argument, really.
Okay. Can you point to any major differences in the way that these two groups trained for warfare? Or again, you said they were aware, obviously they had some cultural exchange and that sort of thing, but did you identify anything else that we haven't talked about?
Well, the reliance, the big one on, so this is from the upland Greeks, the reliance on surprise is big, and deception too, which I found very intriguing as I started to study these. It's not something that the ancient writers who document these encounters, it's not something that they appear to have been aware of. They offer these reasonable explanations for why things happened in, say, Arcadia. So the Spartans invade Arcadia in 370, and Xenophon offers these explanations of why the Spartans weren't so successful. But the possibilities, maybe it didn't quite understand what the Arcadians were up to, and this was really the main focus of the book. These possibilities, surprise and deception are the main ones, and compared to the way that the Athenians typically fought on land, and certainly the Spartans and the Thebans and the Thessalians, day and night. So that's probably the main one, or the main two, the surprise and then the deception.
Did the upland Greeks also have, your prominent heroes among the groups the way the lowland Greeks did, or was it more soldiers were at the same level?
Well, they had the Phocians, the Arcadians, they had like very deep Greek roots. So they come up in Homer, for instance, and like the catalogue of ships. But and the Arcadians in particular were famous for being fierce soldiers. They had a reputation for being some of the best mercenaries, and that's as hoplites. That's as conventional Greek infantrymen, with the shield, with the armor. The Acarnanians too. Talk about the Acarnanians in chapter 3. Again, they repelled a Spartan invasion. They had hoplites as well. And it wasn't really the focus or the primary means of fighting for these armies all the time, but they were fully capable of it, and they had the resources to field armies along those lines.
I don't know if you've mentioned it. You also discussed the Aetolians. That's the fourth group.
Yeah, and they had none. They appeared. There's no record of them fighting as hoplites at all, and this is the Aetolian, the rout of the Athenians, because they really did. That was an extremely violent incident in Aetolia, and there's zero record that the Aetolians fought as anything other than light-armed skirmishers, like javeliniers.
How about, is there anything about naval warfare in what you found?
There's not from the Athenian invasion of Aetolia in 426. That came from the sea, but upland Greeks and navies, no, nothing at all. I mean, nothing like the triremes or the Athenian fleet. No, so it was primarily a land phenomenon.
So, since you did mention that Homer does have names that some of these groups had ships, it just makes me wonder, how would they have any kind of ships or naval aspect to their military forces?
Yeah, well, the catalogue of ships, yeah, that's a mythical event of, as you know, of the Achaeans or the Greeks that sailed to Troy. What happened to those ships, or what they were, I mean, who knows? But during the classical period, there is no record at all of any sort of navy or any sort of maritime operations either. Arcadia, for instance, this is the latest incident that I studied, is basically a landlocked region, kind of like Afghanistan is. So no access to the coast, and then also very mountainous. The Aetolians, during the time that the Athenians invaded, were basically the same thing. Did have access to a strip of the coast, but it wasn't much compared to their territory. They were primarily inland. The Acarnanians, the third case, they did have a coastal component to their territory. And that is where the Spartans invaded from, was from the coast. And then finally the Arcadians, which I mentioned at the start, which were landlocked. So, and then the Phocians, also practically landlocked, with only the slightest access to the coast around where Thermopylae is actually. So they didn't really have a maritime component to their territory.
Do you have any information as far as differences in weapons and armor, and also maybe in their supplies or food that they ate between these two different groups?
None of that actually seemed to be out of the ordinary in any way. And the only way that I can say that with any confidence is that anything that was out of the ordinary, that's typically what ancient authors like to talk about. So it's different to have an army that doesn't wear armor and doesn't have shields and spears. This is the Aetolian case. So Thucydides is going to mention that all these Aetolians were just light armed. Like they weren't wearing much, and their weapons didn't really seem to be all that impressive, but they did beat the Athenians handily. So what the Greeks from the upland regions are using was actually pretty familiar. It's just on balance, they had more skirmishers and more people fighting with javelins than wearing armor and carrying shields and spears. So that was all perfectly what we'd expect, in other words. So in the case of the Phocians, they account from Herodotus as it's not much there, but enough. But it appears that they actually did fight wearing armor and shields and helmets and all that. So just what was so unusual about that case is, like I said before, it happened at night. So a raid at night in the mountains, which is very, very unusual. But otherwise, no, the weapons, the equipment was what we'd expect. And as far as food's concerned, it's the same sorts of concerns. The logistics of ancient armies. You could carry some food into a territory that you're invading if you're, say, Athenians or Spartans or Thessalians, but you're also going to have to live off the land, and some of that comes from ravaging crops from the Greeks that you're invading. Some of it comes just from the grass that was available for cattle, for your baggage train, things like that. But again, nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, they were all very familiar. The Greek mainland is the Greek mainland, so the Greeks knew what they could and couldn't eat and what was and wasn't available. So
it seems that the mountains would be a more difficult area to invade because of less food, maybe less crops, whereas it would be easier to invade, the lowland areas because there was food, more food.
Yeah, and this is one of the common things that we see with lowland warfare is that devastation of crops, and as a means to get someone to come out and fight. We're gonna try to hack down your grapes, your vines, your olives. Not going to destroy the crops. I mean, that'd be extremely difficult to do, but we are going to damage them. So it was expected, yes, that everybody's going to have grapes. Everyone's going to have olives. There may be fruit trees depending on the time of year. But you're right, to bring, say, cattle, horses into a place like Aetolia, you'd have to wonder. I mean, this is really going to be slow. You're going to be very slow. You're going to be clunky. You're going to be loud, and you're going to be vulnerable. And so, like in the Aetolians' case, that's well aware of that. And which is also very typical of mountain territory is that there's only so many places you can go if you are an army. So your routes are limited. And looking at a topographical map, you start to see, well, look, and this is the Athenian invasion of Aetolia. This is chapter 2. If you land here, like Thucydides said, this is where the Athenians end up, and you're going to invade Aetolia, well, there's really only one route that you can take. There's one reasonable one. There's a couple that you could take, but there's only one that makes sense. And if you're an Aetolian, you know that, and you've known it all your life. So then it's just a question of, well, how far are these guys going to go? And when they make it clear that they're serious about this, well, then from the Aetolian perspective, I guess it's time to fight. And activated that defensive strategy, that plan that they developed, they put it in place, and they pulled it off, like, very successfully.
Did the upland Greeks fortify any of these limited routes into their territories? Permanent fortifications of some kind, or?
Not during the classical period. Not during the time that I'm studying these Greeks, and in fact, it's one of the. If they did, I mean, it'd almost be a waste of time. It's not like you couldn't get around fortifications. I mean, there were different ways that you could go, but it'd be almost impossible to stop an invading army. So this was back to the Persian Wars, with the Greeks initially thinking they were going to confront the Persians at the Valley of Tempe, but it's just too big. Like, this isn't going to work. There's no way that we can. This is a choke point, so the Persians have to come through here, but the space is just too big. We need a narrower space. So, and in that case, they fell back to Thermopylae. But even then, it wasn't like Thermopylae was the only route through central Greece. There were others. There was one that went through Phocis that the Persians did use with the Thessalian guys. So there wasn't any. It was almost like if an army is going to invade, they're going to be in our territory. So it's not, can we keep them out? It's more, what are we going to do if they're here? And that was also very different. The basic conventions of lowland warfare in the ancient Greek world, that territorial integrity was huge. No, you didn't violate our land. And that's, we'd line up, we'd bring our army out, our army of citizens, and we're going to meet you right there. And we're going to prevent you from coming in here. But for the upland Greeks, they didn't really seem that concerned about that. They, in fact, it was to their advantage to let you into their territory, draw you into an area that was beneficial from the defender's perspective. And once you were there, they could get you there. That was the time to attack. So not keep you out, but bring you in to where we want you, and we'll fight on our terms. And I argue that they were so good at that the writers like Thucydides and Xenophon and Herodotus weren't even aware that these incidents that they're documenting, that just had all these fantastic explanations for why, the Spartans and Athenians and why they weren't so successful. But everything that I just said, that does not appear to have crossed their mind. And so there's no way those upland Greeks, there's no way they could have done that. They weren't sophisticated enough for that. It must be for some other reason. It must be because Agesilaus, the Spartan commander, it must be because he made a mistake. So, and I'm arguing just the opposite.
Interesting. So, how was territory marked then? Since you mentioned that, don't cross this area, were there distinct boundaries, and if so, how did they establish that?
And there were boundary stones that marked off different territory, different types of territory, and then geographical features as well that shifted from time to time. But nothing, and a mountain range, for instance. So, the Spartans and the Arcadians and Spartans, they were neighbors, but they were separated by a pretty serious mountain range. So nothing like a fence or a stone wall or something like that. And then also just the people that lived there that were, say, ethnically Arcadian. This is Arcadian, not Laconian, not Spartan. But no, they weren't certainly not as clear as they are today with say, nation-state boundaries and state boundaries.
Mm-hmm. I'm speaking with David Blome, author of Greek Warfare Beyond the Polis. You can get more information by searching for him on academia.edu. If you like this podcast, please rate it on whatever podcast feed you're listening to it on. Please also follow, like, and comment on my website, warscholar.org, at YouTube under Warscholar 1945, on Twitter and Facebook at Warscholar, and on Instagram at Chris Alvarez Warscholar. If you like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, please check out my podcast, Full Contact Nerd, also located at chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. If you like outer space, business, technology, and policy, please check out my podcast, Spacewalks Money Talks, also at spacewalksmoneytalks.com. Now back to the podcast. Let's turn to the resources you used for your research. Obviously, ancient authors and such, and also, was there any archaeological evidence that you used in your research?
Yeah, there was. The main form of it was archaeological surveys of all of these regions that were there, and some of them were 30, 40 years old. That I just talked about Aetolia in particular, just the way of life in Aetolia, and I was interested in. It was probably, I think, one of the better examples in Aetolia's case. These are archaeologists. I was interested in routes of movement and communication, things like that. And this group of archaeologists, they studied the line of sight between different features, like geographical features in Aetolia. And they offered, it was this really neat study, this inner visibility study. They said that, if you're in one place, this is what you could see. So if you did potentially signal from there, it could get you to this point, and if you were at that point, and you say base north, you could see two other geographical locations, and if you could see them, you could make your way all the way through Aetolian territory. It was really fascinating what they put forth. So they went and physically occupied all these different sites, and then said, yeah, you could see each other, you could signal to each other. So I use that to think about the Athenian invasion of that same territory where they'd conducted that study. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Aetolians were well prepared for the Athenians when they did show up and initiate their invasion. I don't think it's a coincidence that happened so quickly. The Aetolian response was so fast and so effective. They were actually fully capable. If they saw ships land on that coast, then they could have signaled the rest of the Aetolian ethnos in less than a day. It would have been that quick. So that's one archaeological study, one survey work that I used. Likewise with really, routes of movement in central Greece, and in the case of the Phocians, when sites were built up, when they were fortified. So sometimes these smaller towns, when exactly were they defensible? Was it during the time of this invasion? And a lot of times the answer to that question was no. Or as far as we could tell, fortifications came a little bit later. So those are the main forms of archaeological evidence.
Mm-hmm. Are there so as far as the ancient authors or historians, are there any others you haven't mentioned yet that you also used?
Well, the main ones, so for in the first case with the Phocians, is Herodotus. And there's other ancient authors, like Pausanias, for instance, that were writing just centuries later. Mm-hmm. And while they're not, sometimes they show that they're based on a different account, so not on Herodotus, which can be helpful, can be, it's worth thinking about. It's difficult to say, well, here you have Herodotus who was writing within 10, 20, within a generation of this incident happening. Should we favor his account over someone that was writing 300, 400 years later? So it seems obvious that you'd want to go with Herodotus, but sometimes those later authors, they do give you some things to think about. Plutarch in particular. So writing for a Roman audience in a Roman world, very interested in these classical Greeks and the things that they did to each other and all this sort of thing. So sometimes he'll offer details and an account that is different. And again, it's worth, you have to take into account, and then as a historian, you're trying to figure out what are the best reasons for going with this interpretation, and often that's in light of what the archaeologists have offered from surveys and things like that. But the main ones, Herodotus is the main one, and then Thucydides, and then Xenophon. And in the case of Thucydides and Xenophon, these are contemporaries, so they were possibly it's a bit of it could have been a part of the encounter, although probably weren't. But they talked to the people that were there. So that's very helpful from a historian's perspective.
Did you get a chance to, have you visited any of these areas and have you seen any artifacts associated with any of this research?
I have. I worked extensively in Greece as an archaeologist for 6 summers. And so traveled extensively in all these areas, and then many others. And as you start to get a feel for the land, and that helped immensely when I sat down with these ancient sources, because that's you look at an account from Thucydides or Xenophon, and it's kind of two-dimensional. Like they'll talk about mountains and things like that, but you don't really have the nitty-gritty detail of what it's like to move through terrain in Greece. And you say, well, why wouldn't he talk about something like that? Well, probably because he knows that everybody that's reading it already knows what it's like. They're Greeks. He's writing in Greek. He's writing for a Greek audience. They don't need to be told what it's like to make your way through the mountains of central Greece, for instance. Mm-hmm. But for a modern audience, like the rest of us, well, that's actually really helpful. And it's not something that we should take for granted. And so spent a lot of time traveling on my own and just going on long hikes and walks and taking in the what it's like to move in different regions. The same, and of course the museums as well. I mean, there's the spearheads and arrowheads and sling stones. I was working at a dig in northern Greece, and on the very last day that we were digging, we uncovered this. This cache of hundreds of these lead sling bullets. They look like little almonds, although they're bigger than that. Mm-hmm. Made out of lead, these things would have been just lethal. And it's one thing to think about. Oh yeah, they say sling stones, and that's okay. But to hold some of these in your hand, and then try to imagine. Based on the work that archaeologists have done with, reconstructing ancient slings. I mean, these things could go through metal, some of them. Wow. So that's what I'm thinking when I'm sitting down with Thucydides and questioning Thucydides' account of what happened in Aetolia, or Acarnania, or Arcadia and Xenophon. So Yeah, so from my perspective as a researcher, then that's right there, right next to the ancient Greek.
Wow, that's cool. What part of the research was most enjoyable for you?
Was writing the reconstructing the actual encounters themselves. If anyone that decides to read the book, and if you're one of those people out there, then I'll thank you up front. But most of the chapters are structured in a way that they give you some background to this is who we're talking about. So these are the Phocians, for instance. These are the Arcadians. This is the incident. This is how it fits into that history of the Arcadians, the Phocians. Here's the actual defense, or here's the route. And that's the main event in each one of those chapters. So it's a very detailed reconstruction of what happened based on what archaeologists have done, based on my reading of the text, like all of that. That was the most fun. Because what I did is I took the ancient authors, I translated them myself. So I put the ancient Greek, I copied the ancient Greek off of a website, put it in the Word document, split it apart. I did my own translation of it, then deleted the ancient Greek. So now I have my translation of it, and then split my translations in a way that said, okay, Xenophon says this, but we have a lot to think about just based on what he says. And so as you read, you'll see there's the quoted text, and then there's the basically the commentary and my analysis of what's actually going on, or what could have been going on. Mm-hmm. And that becomes the heart of each chapter. And I just got lost in that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I lost track of time. I enjoyed it so much. And that was certainly my favorite part.
Were there more than 4 cases you could have done, or were those the only that sort of fit what you were trying to do?
Yeah, this is I think the somewhat crazy thing is, for the entire classical period, these are the ones that made it in the ancient authors, because there were more than just these 4 groups of upland Greeks, the ones that I talk about in the book. There were many other upland or mountain societies, but we just don't hear about them until much later. And the Macedonians are one of them. They come up. We're talking Macedonians when the Persians invade right at the start of the 5th century BCE. But they were there the whole time, but they're not in the classical sources. So the encounters, those unusual encounters in Greek warfare, the ones that made it, these are the 4. And it took me a little bit of time to find them and then start to look at them together. But I went through all of them, all the ancient sources, and this was it. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know this going into it. But as I found, when I did sit down and do the analysis and then look at that in relation to each other, there was just this very intriguing pattern that started to come up. And that's basically the subtitle of the book. Is this defense, but then strategy, and then this early proto-history of federal states. They all have that in common. And so I had to go and learn more about ancient federalism and ancient federal states and studies of ancient strategy, and ultimately came up with the central argument of the book based on that analysis of these 4, only 4 of them.
So what did you find that was most surprising during your research?
I was surprised at how effective the defenses were as I was studying them. I wasn't, in some cases, reading, say, Xenophon at face value, and he has all his reasons that, the Spartans weren't so successful. But you train very early to, not going to take an ancient author at face value, and there's a whole skill set of how you question and deal with ancient sources. But just with that, just the historian's natural inclination to ask questions about sources, and why a writer says the things that in this case he says, Xenophon. I said, well, this is really interesting, because this sounds a lot like an ambush in one case, or in a couple cases, in fact. And Xenophon's clearly not thinking that. But I was like, well, I wonder if there's anything to this. And then to say to find one of those in all the ancient sources, like that'd be interesting and be worth talking about. To find two of them, I was like, yeah, these are kind of similar. You do have this surprise raid at night. To find three of them, I said, this is getting interesting. And then to find a fourth one, it took me a while. I think I can remember clearly it took me about 2 weeks to go through those sources, even just after some preliminary research, to realize that they did have a common theme, and then to start checking that against other research on these societies. And so I had a hunch based on the analysis that I'd done, and it took 2 weeks to confirm that no, I was actually on to something. So for doing the work of a classical scholar, a historian, I mean, that's just as exciting as it gets. And I mean, it makes it worth doing.
Yeah.
But I do remember, and I'll never forget having the four in front of me and just saying, that's it. No, that's it. That's how they're related. And almost couldn't believe it, but it was there, and it came from doing the nitty-gritty, detailed reconstruction of these four encounters. Yeah.
Cool. So I know there's obviously with studying ancient history, there's a lot of gaps in information and stuff, but was there a particular question that you wanted to get at that was the most difficult to come to a conclusion? Maybe you did reach a conclusion, but it took a while more than other aspects, or maybe there's something you'd really still like to know.
Yeah, there's two versions of that, and they go in two directions. So one is back in time, so even before the classical period, and then there's one moving forward, which would be a lot easier to study because the amount of sources just increases as you get closer to the Roman period and into the Roman period. And those are two, I think, really intriguing questions that I'm arguing that these upland Greeks, each individually, had developed a defensive strategy, and they used it to repel invasions from the lowlands. And I'm also arguing that they did this without the direction of a central, formal federal government. And that's an original argument. It's based on analysis of these sources that, for the most part, have been overlooked or just not really questioned that much. But okay, if that's the case, then and this is in place by the time of the invasions. Well, when did that start? And so some of the archaeological research that I did, the work in Greece, in fact, most of it was based on Bronze Age settlements. And so this is the time, roughly 1200 BC. So you're talking, almost, this was a long time before the classical period. But most of these upland areas, there are Bronze Age remains of a society that inhabited those mountains, and really at the middle of that Iron Age, this is like Homer's day, they're there. Arcadians are there and Phocians are there. So when did this start? What were the reasons for it coming together in the first place? And they're all, unfortunately, just the nature of ancient evidence. I don't know if anybody will be able to answer them, but they're questions that are worth asking. And if ever someone can find evidence that speaks to the questions, I think it's really worth digging into. And then later in history, the other question is that the Aetolians, for instance, they did form a league state called the Aetolian League that was Rome's main rival for a period of time. So very powerful, very well organized during the Hellenistic period. And in particular, there's an Achaean League as well, a Phocian League. The Acarnanians became part of the Aetolian League, so they joined up some time later. But they were very successful, and the structures that they developed, the federal structures, were similar to the ones that the Romans developed. And this is what the founding fathers are talking about in the Federalist Papers. You know, they're interested in this kind of stuff. These Polybius, the Greek writer, and writing in a Roman world, he's talking about federal republican structures. But the Greeks in some ways were there first, and they were really good at this. And I'm arguing that they were good at that organization. They were good at that sort of collective action well before they were actually formal states. So what is it about these incidents? What can they tell us about the roots and then later successes of federal states in the Greek world?
I have a question that is probably outside the scope of the book, but so the word league, you know, why that word, and what does it mean? What does it say about the political organization of these groups?
Yeah, the federal terminology to, you know, league state and federal state and confederation. So a league is more of a combination of two independent or two coherent states. So in the case of the Aetolians, like, it meant something to be Aetolian during the classical period. It meant something to be Acarnanian. So they were two, and this is just in the classical period, they were two states in a sense, or nations, people, like the sense of ethnos, that Greek word again. But if you combine them and there's a formal agreement between the two, they become something else. So they're individually, they're still two states, but now they're also part of a bigger state. And there were political alliances along those lines as a league, and there were also religious ones as well. The Delphic and Fictioni. So you have this a league state that's centered on Delphi. That's its constituent members were all from different political regions. So the Phocians and one. So, yeah.
Was there anything in your research, I know this is ancient stuff, but anything that emotionally moved you, either positively or negatively? Emotionally,
that's a good question. I think there's I had just the good fortune of having fantastic friends and advisors along the way that read my work and took it seriously and really were critical. And I don't think I was fully aware of this, but I was very critical of the Spartans in particular and Agesilaus and his decisions and how he conducted affairs in Acarnania and Arcadia in particular. And I had people that called me on that, like almost saying, like, don't you think you're being a little harsh on the Spartans? Or don't you think you're being a little unfair to Agesilaus? This was actually even like one of the external reviewers for the book pointed this out as well. And so I did have to do some thinking about that, because once somebody pointed it out to me, a couple people did. Yeah, what is it about this? I mean, maybe that's true. And so I had to go back and actually, and I think in a way that was a little bit more objective, was to balance some of the criticism that I had of the Spartans. Yeah. So there was something, there was something to it. You know, yeah, it really, and I'm not entirely sure what it was, but yeah, I think that probably a part of it was to have someone like Xenophon, who I actually, he's an incredible source, but to have him go thousands of years with just Xenophon all the time saying that this guy is so wonderful and he did everything right, there was something about that bothered me. It was like, well, let's maybe set the record straight, or in a way that did connect with my military experience, in a way to say that, yeah, well, there's the official account, and then there's what actually happened, and anybody that's been there knows that there can be some serious discrepancies between the two. And so it did feel like I was dealing with the official account, and I do think there was an emotional component to that. You know, this ancient official account that, you know, maybe it took 2,000 years, but or it's longer than that. Maybe we could set the record straight. So that, and yeah, so that's a good question.
So, ultimately, what do you hope the book will do?
Right. I hope it gets people thinking and arguing about these upland states during the classical period, the legacy of these military successes. I hope that people challenge me on what I'm arguing. I think that's really the purpose of good history books, and I'm 100% convinced that someone is going to, and I hope someone does this, but I'm convinced it's going to happen. Someone will review the book and point out things that I wasn't aware of, or make points that I didn't quite take into account either at all, or I didn't think about too seriously. And I'll learn from that, and I'll be that much better equipped for the next round, or whatever I choose to do next. So it's exciting. It doesn't. I'm curious, and I'm just with the nature of things. I'm imagining it'll be something that I'm not thinking about right now. So it's in a way, it's something to look forward to. I just really do hope that people read it, take the argument seriously, and then really question why I'm saying what I'm saying. And that would be ideal. I think it couldn't get any better than that.
Right. Yeah. So, did you have any difficulties getting the book finished or published?
I had publishers that were kind of so-so on it, and they said, "Yeah, tell you what, when you're done, why don't you send it to me, and I'll take a look." And when I think back, it was discouraging at the time, but I probably shouldn't have been as discouraged as I was. But eventually reached out to the editors at Cornell, and they seemed interested. And so I had the work done and shared with them what I had, and every step of the way went pretty well. But it took some time. It took longer than I anticipated, longer than I wanted to. But I think it found a really, really good home at Cornell University Press, and I really do believe that. They just, beginning to end, are just fantastic people to work with.
Yeah. Nice. What's your next writing project, if there is one right now?
So I'm probably always thinking about the ancient Greeks. I'm writing fiction these days, just based on my military experience. So that's where my main writing efforts are with that, and having some early successes with it, which is exciting. But I am still thinking a lot about the Greeks, and maybe different innovative ways to think about some of the encounters that more people are familiar with, like Marathon in particular. What would be a creative way to maybe imagine or reimagine some of these famous battles? But so writing wise, I'm in a slightly different realm these days. But the wheels are still turning up there, and like I say, still excited to hear what people have to say, and I hope they have a lot to say about the book, and that'll probably direct me in a different direction. But again, as I'm excited about.
Okay. Where can people find you on the web? Do you have social media or anything?
Yeah, academia.edu is a good place to start, and then my email address is on there, and people are welcome to contact me with any questions at all about anything, and that's the best place to start.
So I guess you'd go to academia.edu and search for David Blome, Blome. Yep,
and I'll come up, and with the book, the cover's on there, and you can email address is accessible, and people can reach out, and as I get more, it's just kind of where I was with doing the research, is if I can start to tie in all of the different writing that I'm doing, all of the different work together somehow. I don't know if that's possible, but I'm going to try. Then once I figure that out, I'll be ready to put together a website that people can access and use for all the different writing. So.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
No, thank you very much for your time, for having me on your podcast.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate it. It was really interesting stuff. Thanks. Thank you for listening. You can find more podcasts like this on your favorite podcast feed under the title Military History Inside Out. That includes Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. One great way to support me is to rate my podcasts, either good or bad. You can find more great military history information at warscholar.org, on YouTube at Warscholar 1945, on Facebook at Warscholar, on Instagram at Chris Alvarez Warscholar, and on Twitter at Warscholar. Please support me by following me on those sites and liking my videos. If you like to read, don't forget to sign up for my weekly newsletter where I recommend newly published books. The subscription box is on my webpage. Thank you.